We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 47a. The Gemara continues a statement of Rava. Rava says, Lo shanu ela do'amar la bazu uvazu uvazu. The Mishnah's case is only specifically in a situation where he says to her that he's being Mekadesh her with this and this and this, talking about separate dates. Rashi says, Lo shanu heicha do'cheles rishona rishona, meaning the end of the Mishnah said, let's say she eats them as she receives them. She eats each date as she receives it. So we only say de'ein mitzdarefes lepruta. We say in that case that you can't join them all together and say that if they're all worth a pruta combined, that she's mekudeshes. So we only say that al da'amar la bazu vazu vazu. That's if the way he phrases it is bazu uvazu uvazu, meaning de lo gamri kiddushin velo nikne lo ad nisino achrona. In that case, what he's essentially saying is the kiddushin is not finished until the last one is given. She gamar diburu. That's the conclusion of his words. Uchvar hayu harishonas milva. At that point in time, if she's eaten them as she received them, she's converting each one into a milva, into a loan, and that's why it's going to be problematic to start combining them in terms of their value. There's no kiddushin with a loan. That's true by bazu, vazu, vazu. Avol amar lo, but if he says to her ba'elu with these, so then afilu ocheles nami mekudeshes. Then even if she's eating it as she receives it, it's a good kiddushin, because kika achla midenafsha ka achla, because then what she is eating really already belongs to her. And Rashi explains avol ba'elu, in a situation of ba'elu, the kabbalah sarishon, in that case when she's receiving the first date, lo basa liyad b'toras milva, she's not getting that as a loan. The misha nigmar hadibor hikne lo b'toras kiddushin, from the time that he concluded his words, he's giving it to her as kiddushin. V'chi achla midida ka achla, and when she's eating what's already hers. V'afilu achla rishon, and even if she eats it one at a time as she receives it, mikudeshes, it is still going to be a good kiddushin. And yesh bekulan shava pruta, if they're all worth together, a shava pruta. And the Gemara continues, Tanya kivase de Rava, we have a brisa that supports Rava, that when it's phrased as ba'elu, so in such a situation, even if she's receiving the dates, and as she's receiving them, she is eating them, it's considered mida nafsha ka'achlan, it's considered a good kiddushin. We have a brisa that supports that idea. The brisa says, Hiskadshi li ba'alon b'rimon uve'agos, let's say he says, be mekudeshes to me with an acorn and a pomegranate and a nut, or if he says, be mekudeshes to me with these. If among all of them they are worth a pruta, then it's a good kiddushin. But if not, it's not a good kiddushin. Bazu, vazu, vazu. Now, if he says with this and with this and with this, if together they're all worth a pruta, it's a good kiddushin. And if not, it is not a good kiddushin. Again, in both of these situations, we're saying that it just needs to be a shava pruta if it's all combined. Now, if he says bazu, if he says be mekudeshes with this, and italaso v'achalaso, she takes it and she eats it immediately, and bazu italaso v'achalaso, and then with this, and she takes that and she eats it immediately, viod bazu, and further with this, and further with this, in that case, eina mekudeshes, it's not a good kiddushin, ad shihei ba'achas mehen shava pruta, until one of them is worth a shava pruta, and that is, of course, similar to what we learned at the end of the Mishnah, that if she is eating them as she receives them, so in such a situation, we have to say that the one of them has to be worth a pruta. You can't combine them to be worth the full pruta. And so the Gemara now brings its proof from the brisa to Rava. Hai ba'alon b'rimon ba'egos. In the beginning of the brisa, when it says, be mekudeshes to me with the acorn and the pomegranate and the nut, hey chigdami, what exactly is the case? Ilema da'amar la o ba'alon, o ba'rimon, o ba'egos. Now, if he said to her, either with the alon, either with the rimon, either with the egos, so im yesh bekulan shava pruta mekudeshes, then you can add them all together, and as long as they're a pruta, that's a good kiddushin. Why would that be true? V'ha'oka, but he said or, which means that each one independently, he's saying either use this or that, each one should have to be worth a pruta, or one of them should have to be worth a pruta for the kiddushin to work. And so the Gemara says, Ve'ela ba'alonu v'rimonu ve'ego. So rather what you'll say is, the first case of the brisa is he's saying that I want you to be mekudeshes to me with all of them combined together, the acorn and the pomegranate and the nut together, and that's why they have to combine. They only have to combine to be a pruta. But if that were the case, hainu bazu uvazu uvazu, that's exactly identical to the next case of the brisa. The next case of the brisa is bazu vazu vazu with this and this and this. That's exactly the same, that they all have to combine to be a shava pruta. And so therefore, what is that first case of the brisa? Elala Lav, rather is it not, Do'amar lo ba'elu, that what he's saying is, he's using the word ba'elu. The same case as Rava, with these, it should be a Kiddushin. And the Gemara says, Hamid Katani Seifa, but from the fact that it says at the end, O sha'amar lo hiskachi li ba'elu, it already gives this case where he says to her, hiskachi li ba'elu. So Mechlal dereisha lav ba'elu askinon. Doesn't that seem to say that the first line is not talking about ba'elu? Again, looking back at the Brisa said, hiskachi li ba'alon b'rimon uve'egos, O sha'amar lo hiskachi li ba'elu. So how can you say the first line is ba'elu if you already have the second line being ba'elu? It sounds like the reisha Mechlal dereisha lav ba'elu askinon. Sounds like the first line of the Brisa is not ba'elu. And to that the Gemara finally says, here's how you understand that first line of the Brisa, Peirushe kamefarish. What's actually happening is, in that first line of the Brisa, it's explaining what it means. Hiskachi li ba'alon b'rimon be'egos, be mekudeshes to me with the acorn, pomegranate, and nut. Keitzad, what does that mean? How so? Kigon da'amar lo hiskachi li ba'elu, meaning he says, hiskachi li ba'elu, that is the case of the first line of the Brisa. It's a case of ba'elu, exactly Rava's case. V'katani seifa. Now let's analyze the Brisa. At the end of the Brisa it says, Bazu netalaso v'achalaso. Again, if she takes it, he says bazu, and then she takes it immediately and eats it. And yesh ba'achas mehem shava pruta mekudeshes. If one of them is worth a pruta, it's a good kiddushin. V'imla aveina mekudeshes, and it's not a good kiddushin. Now that was at the end of the Brisa by the case of bazu. V'ilu reisha, whereas in the first line of the Brisa, lo kamavlik bein ocheles lemanachas. The Brisa does not seem to make a distinction between eating it as she's getting it or just putting it down in front of her. Shma mina, so you see from this, Kol Hecha Da'amar La Ba'elu, that as long as he said to her the word Ba'elu, just like Rava said, so there it doesn't matter if she eats it immediately there, even if she eats it immediately, as long as combined they're all worth a pruta, that's going to be a good kiddushin, because Kiko Achla Minafsha Ka'achla, because she's eating from what is her own. Again, as Rava said, when you say the word Ba'elu, that's already different. In such a situation, you're saying that the kiddushin is right now, and then you're giving all of the items for the kiddushin, so there's no problem if she eats it as she receives it. And the Gemara says, Shema Mina, indeed you see that is true. That's what the Bryce is saying, that if the word Ba'elu is used, it doesn't matter whether she places it down or whether she eats it as she receives it. And the Gemara continues, Now this Brisa makes sense according to the one who says that's Rabbi Ami. According to Rabbi Ami that explained our Mishnah, the last line of our Mishnah is very similar to the last line of the Brisa over here. So according to Rabbi Ami's explanation of the last line of our Mishnah, we can understand the last line of this Brisa. And the Gemara now explains again what Rabbi Ami said. What does it mean when it said at the last line of the Mishnah? What does it mean when it said that if one of them is worth a pruta, it's going to be a good kiddushin? Let's say she's eating it as she receives it. Again, the case of the Mishnah at the end is talking about a case where in general you could combine the values of everything to a pruta, because he didn't say hiskachi. So in general you could combine it, but that's only true if it's manachas, if she places it down in front of her. But the Mishnah said that if she eats it as she receives it, so then it has to be that the last one, according to Rabbi Ami, is worth a pruta. That's what the Gemara is now saying. What does it mean that one of them needs to be worth a pruta? The last one needs to be worth a pruta. So then hachinami. So then in this case also, meaning in the Brisa as well, bachrona shava pruta. That's what the Brisa means here also. The Brisa means that if she's eating it as she receives it, in the cases at the end of the Brisa where it's not the cases of ba'elu but the cases of bazu, so if the last one is worth a pruta, then it's going to be a good kiddushin. Again, like Rabbi Ami said before, if the earlier ones are worth a pruta, it doesn't matter. That's not going to work as an effective kiddushin, because those are essentially going to be converted into loans the moment that she eats it, and then the kiddushin is coming at the end. You can't be mekadesh a woman with a loan, and so that's why it had to be the last one that's worth a pruta. So we can understand the last line of the Brisa if you're following the understanding of the last line of the Mishnah according to Rabbi Ami. But according to Rav Shmuel, they say that the last line of the Mishnah had nothing to do with the case where we generally could combine them to be worth a pruta. They actually say that line in the Mishnah is going on the case where he says hiskachi, that anyway one of them needs to be worth a pruta. Diamri, they say tarvayu aresha koi, they're both going on the beginning. Diamri tarvayu, meaning both Rav and Shmuel, they both say it's going aresha. It's going on the first case, aresha koi, it's going on the first case of the Mishnah. And the chiddush is that if she's eating them as as she receives it. If she eats it the moment she receives it, v'yocheles it's strichale. That's a chiddush. Then when she's eating it as she receives it, the Gemara said, according to Rav and Shmuel, you might have thought even if it's not worth a pruta, it should still be a kiddushin because she's getting a benefit so immediately. Maybe because of that immediate benefit, she gives herself over to kiddushin. So if that's how you explain the last line of the Mishnah, so how do we explain it over here in the Brisa? Hacha klali kachashiv prati lo kachashiv. Over here, you only have the generalizations, you don't have the specifications. Meaning to say over here, in this Brisa, there is no case of hiskachi, hiskachi, hiskachi. We don't have that case in the Brisa. In the Mishnah, you have a case of hiskachi, hiskachi, hiskachi. That's the first case of the Mishnah. That's where we say they're all independent statements, and since they're all independent statements, it's prate, so therefore it has to be worth a pruta. And then the chiddush is, even when she's eating it, as she receives it, it has to be worth a pruta. But here you don't even have that. Here you only have the situations where you are combining. So how do you understand the last line of the Brisa? And the Gemara says, Hamani Rebbe. The Gemara says you'll have to say, according to Rav and Shmuel, that this Brisa follows Rebbe. The Yomar, because Rebbe says, Loshna kazayis kazayis, veloshna kazayis ukazayis. It doesn't matter if it's kazayis kazayis or kazayis ukazayis. Prata havi, it is considered to be prata. It's considered to be independent statements, specifications. In other words, our brisa, even though you don't do hiskachi, 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 it's considered to be separate statements, and it has to be worth a pruta, and that's what the brisa is saying at the end. That's even true if she eats it as she receives it. And Rashi explains, Hanicha lav l'rava parchinon. This question over here of the Hanicha, which is asking on the last line of the Brisa, comparing it to the last line of the Mishnah, we're not asking a question on Rava. Ela la'elkai, we're going on earlier, the mitartzinon haiso cheles de masnisin l'rav u'shmuel ha'reisha u'l'Rav Yami ha'seif. Again, we said earlier, the last line of the Mishnah, Rav and Shmuel explained the last line of the Mishnah is going on the beginning of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yami says it's going on the end of the Mishnah. And so the Gemara now is saying, Hanicha l'Rabbi Yami to ukma l'haiso cheles de masnisin ha'seifa to have a klola. It's good according to Rabbi Yami, because he says the last line of the Mishnah is going on the end of the Mishnah, the case where, again, you're combining everything. It's not separate statements. Umay ba'achas ba'achron, and one of them has to be worth a pruta, means the last one has to be worth a pruta. Hachanami hoyso cheles de brisa koinami aklola kedtani ba bazu vazu. Same thing's happening in the brisa. If she's eating it as she receives it in the brisa, it's going on the case of bazu bazu, where you're putting them all together. It's klola. And miyesh bekulan shavapruta mekudeshes. Again, you generally can combine them, and then if it's worth a pruta altogether, it's mekudeshes. V'tana pluksagabe netalaso and then it's saying at the end of the brisa, if she eats it as she receives it, then already one of them, the last one, has to be worth a pruta. Matzino nami l'trutze ache ba'achrona. We can say same thing over here. It's got to be the last one worth a pruta. And l'Rav Shmuel, but according to Rav and Shmuel, the Amri biachas afilu achada mikamaisa nami amri, that Rav and Shmuel say that when it talks about the biachas, it doesn't just mean the last one that's given to her. It means any of them, as long as one of them is worth a pruta. V'aprota the hiskachi hiskachi. It's going on the beginning of the Mishnah of hiskachi hiskachi, which is what we call prota, where they're independent statements, where even from the outset it has to be that one of them is worth a pruta. V'yocheles it's strichale, and again according to Rav and Shmuel, the chiddush is bayocheles, meaning that even when she's eating it as she receives it, it still has to be worth a pruta. Hi biachas de brisa hechem etartzi. So how do you understand here the biachas of the brisa? Habach brisa lo tanasham prata. Here in this brisa there is no prata case. There is no case of iskachi iskachi. Ta bazu vazu vazu klala chashav la. By bazu bazu vazu, that's klala. The kol sheken hechat katani viod bazu viod bazu viod bazu. That's also going to be klala when it's viod. The katani gabe ochelas ache biachas mehen, and it says that if she's eating it as she receives it, one of them has to be a pruta. Via kamaisa dachlasanu miyad nami koamar diika bechadash of pruta mekudeshes kasha havalei milvan. You can't say we're going on the earlier case where she eats it immediately, and if one of them is worth a pruta, she's mekudeshes. That's not true again, because on the earlier ones that she receives, that's considered a loan, as we said. And again, according to Rav and Shmuel, you're not answering that we're only going on the last one that's given to her. So how do you understand the brisa according to Rav and Shmuel? And Rashi continues, Hachi Garcinon Hamoni Rebbe. So the answer of the Gemara was this brisa follows Rebbe. The Yamar Loshna Kazayas Kazayas Loshna Kazayas Ukazayas Prata Havi. He says that it's considered a prata even with different formulations, meaning Vahach Seifa de Katani Bazuna Talaso Vachalaso Viod Bazu Viod Bazu. When it says at the very end of this brisa that if he says Bazu and she takes it and eats it, and then Bazu and she takes it and eats it, Tana Acharinahu. This is a different Tana. Velav Hainu Tana Deresho Mitzias. It's actually not the same Tana that teaches the beginning and in the middle of the brisa. Usfir le Rebbe. This last line of the brisa is following Rebbe. V'tana ocheles, and it says ocheles vua din lamanachas. The same was true by placing it down. Doesn't matter if she eats it as she receives it. Doesn't matter if she places it down as she receives it. V'ocheles it's strichale, and the chiddush is even by the case of ocheles lashminim to teach us the afagav de mekarva hanayasa, even though she's getting the benefit immediately. Lo mikdash shavapachos mishava pruta. The kiddushin will not work if it's less than a shava pruta. Meaning, the last line of the brisa follows Rebbe that this case is considered to be prata. Meaning to say it's the same as, even though you didn't say hiskachi, but still the formulation, the way the language was said, is considered to be prata. And really, you need to have a pruta in one of them to be a good kiddushin. And the chiddush at the end of the brisa is, even if she's eating it as she receives it, it still needs to be worth a pruta. We don't say that since the benefit is immediate, it doesn't need to be worth a pruta. No, it does need to be worth a pruta. That's why it says bazu twice. When it says she takes it and she eats it, v'od bazu, v'tanam yesh ba'achas mikul and shava pruta mikudeshes, mishum desvir lehiskachi akol chodakoi. The point over here is that the word hiskachi that he says at the beginning is going on each statement independently. Hiskachi bazu, v'od bazu hiskachi. Hiskachi, even though he only says the word hiskachi once, but automatically we assume it to be independent statements. Prata, hiskachi bazu, and then hiskachi bazu, and then v'od bazu hiskachi. Hiskachi is going on each independent statement. And again, the chiddush is, of course, we know it needs to be worth a pruta. One of them needs to be worth a pruta. Even in a situation, the chiddush is, even when she's eating it as she receives it, it needs to be worth a pruta. Now, where do we see that Rebbe uses this idea? Rebbe says this idea that they're independent statements even without hiskachi. V'ach the Rebbe bezvachim in Perek Beis. This sheet of Rebbe's in Zvachim in the second Perek, it's talking about pigel over there. That's when you have an improper thought, when you're bringing a carbon that you're going to eat it outside of the proper time or place. So he's thinking at the time he shechs the carbon, whether he's shechting it on condition to eat a kazayis tomorrow or kazayis outside of the area, or let's say he says that I'm shechting in order to eat a kazayis tomorrow and a kazayis outside of the proper place. Doesn't matter how he formulated that thought. It's always considered to be two separate machshavas, two separate thoughts of pigel. Well, Rabbi Yehuda da'azal basar lashon rishon have a pigel, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who follows the first part of his language that's considered pigel, the chayav and all of kares, and it's going to be a chayav kares. So that's what Rabbi said over there in Meseches Zvachim, and we're applying that over here as well, that the word hiskachi, it goes on every statement independently, even though he didn't repeat hiskachi, just like over there, it's considered to be two separate thoughts of pigel. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Amar Rav says, Hamakadesh b'milva eina mekudeshes. If somebody uses a loan as a kiddushin, that is not a good kiddushin, meaning to say, the person says to the woman, the money which you owe me, I am now forgiving to you, and in exchange for that forgiveness, there should be a kiddushin. That's not a good kiddushin. And the reason is, milva lahotza nitna, the reason is the purpose of a loan is to be spent. And Rashi explains, Eina Mekudeshes, it's not a good Kiddushin, Afilu Yeshna Be'ein. The point is, even if the money is still in front of us, she hasn't spent the money yet, and then he forgives for her the debt, she doesn't have to pay that money back, that's still not a good Kiddushin, because Lohotzah Nitna, because it's meant to be spent. Halova Rashoy Lohotzia Behotzah. The borrower is able to spend the money. Ve'eno Chayv La'amida Be'iska Shetei Metzuya B'chol Eish Yitvenim. He doesn't have to set it up in a fashion that the money is always available whenever the person comes to claim it. V'keiva de Lohotzah Nitna, since it's meant to be spent, it's considered to be like hers. When he forgives it to her, it's not like he's giving her anything, and that's why it's not a good kiddushin. That's why Rav says that Mekadesh b'milva is not a good kiddushin. And the Gemara says, Neima ketanoi. Let us say that this is a machlokas tanoim. It says in the Brisa, Hamakadesh b'milva eina mekudeshes. If somebody uses a loan as kiddushin, that's not a good kiddushin. V'yeshomer, but others say mekudeshes, that it is a good kiddushin. And the Gemara says, My lab v'hakamiflagi. Isn't it true that they're arguing in the following? Demar savar milva lohotzah nitna. One holds that a loan is meant to be spent. Umar savar milva lav lohotzah nitna. And the other one holds that a loan is not meant to be spent. But the Gemara says, V'tizbra, is that really logical? Can you really say that's the machlokas tanoim in this brisa? Ema seifa, let's look at the end of the very same brisa. It says, V'shavim b'mecher, it says both opinions agree that let's say the loan is used for a sale, meaning to say one person is selling a field to another person, and the buyer, instead of giving money, he wants to forgive a loan to the seller. So everybody agrees there, shazek kana, everybody agrees over there that it is considered a good acquisition. And the Gemara says, now if you're going to say that a loan is meant to be spent, so how could it be a good acquisition? What's creating the kinyan over here by mecher, that we suddenly say by mecher that is considered to be a good kinyan? And Rashi explains, V'shavin b'mecher, they both agree when it comes to a sale. Im macher lo karka shenikna bekesef, if he sells him land, and again that's acquired with money. Im amar le milve sheyesh li alecha yehei loch b'shvil ha-mecher, if he says instead of giving you money, the loan, the money that you owe me, I'm forgiving to you, you keep it, and that should be for the sale. Minisratz lo, and he agrees, kana halokeach im yeshna bein, as long as the money is still in front of us, as long as it's still around, so then the lokeach does acquire. And again, the question was, if you hold milva lahotza nitana, and that's why it doesn't work for a kiddushin, so why should it suddenly work by mecher? And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman says, Huna chavrin, Huna our colleague, Rav Huna our colleague, Mukim la b'mili ochari. He says that this brisa is actually talking about another matter entirely. V'hachav mayaskin, and here the case is as follows. Kagon sha'amar lo, let's say he says to her, the man says to the woman, His gadshili b'mana b'mekudeshes to me with a money. V'nimsa mana chaser dinar. It turns out when he gives it to her, it's a money, but it's lacking 1 dinar. It's 1 dinar less than a full money. And so the machlokas tanoim in the brisa is Mar Savar, one holds ksifala milsa lemitve, that it's embarrassing for her to try to claim that last dinar, and so therefore it's not considered a good kiddushin. Umar Savar, and the other one holds lo ksifala milsa lemitve, it's not embarrassing to ask for the last dinar, and therefore it is considered to be a good kiddushin. That last dinar essentially turns into a loan. And the Gemara continues, but what about that which Rabbi Elazar said? Hiskadshi li b'mana. Let's say a man says to a woman, "Be mekudeshes to me for a money." V'nasan la dinar, and he gives her just 1 dinar out of the 100 dinars, and the rest he says is just going to be a loan. Harezu mekudeshes v'yashlam, that is considered a good kiddushin, and he just owes her the rest of the money. He has to complete and give her the rest of the money. So leima ketanoi amar l'shmaite. Are we going to say that what Rabbi Elazar said is really subject to a machlokas tanoim? Because we just said it's essentially the same case. If he gives her 99 dinar and he owes her 1 dinar, there's a machlokas tanoim whether that's a kiddushin. So we should say the same thing should be in the reverse case. It should be a machlokas tanoim. And the Gemara says no, it's not a machlokas tanoim. Amri, they answer moneh chaser dinar. When it comes to giving her a moneh, but you're lacking 1 dinar, you give her 99 dinar. So then ksifala milsa lemitzveh. Then already it's embarrassing for her to go ask for that last dinar. However, moneh chaser tishin v'teisha. But if it's a moneh, but it's missing 99, meaning to say you gave her 1 dinar, you still owe her 99 dinar. So lo ksifala milsa lemitzveh. That's not embarrassing to ask for, and therefore over there everybody agrees that it is a good kiddushin. And Rashi explains, b'mili ochari, again we explain the brayso, it's talking about something else, b'davar acher, a different issue. Tahach milva lo b'milva sheyesh lo aleh ka'amar, meaning when the brayso says that he's mekadesh her with a loan, it doesn't mean that she owes him money and he's using that, he's forgiving that for the kiddushin. Rather what it means is as follows. He says to her, Hiskadshi liba money. He says, Be mekudeshes to me for a money. V'nimtza money chaser dinner. Then what he gives her is only 99 dinner. V'yomar lo, and then he says to her, Harehu alayim milva. The rest that I owe you, that should be a loan. You're just going to be mekudeshes to me with the 99. So in that case, ksifa la milsa. In that case, ksifa la milsa la mitzvah. In that case, it's embarrassing for her to ask for the last dinar. V'lo samcha daita. She doesn't even rely on getting it. Hilka chayna mekudeshes. That's why it's not kiddushin. She has in mind that she's never going to ask for that last dinar. She was told she was going to get 100. She didn't get 100, and therefore she's not relying on what he says. It's not a good kiddushin. But ksifa la milsa, again, why is it embarrassing? The davar muatu, the dinar mimone. It's such a small amount. A dinar from a money. Dinar mimone is such a small amount. She doesn't even want to ask for it. And the Gemara continues, Rebbe Elazar shelo kibla mikol hamana ela dinar. Now in the case of Rebbe Elazar, where she only gets from the entire money, she only gets 1 dinar of the money, lo ksifala milsa lemitzveas hamana. So it's actually not embarrassing to claim the rest. If in such a situation, everyone will agree it is a good kiddushin. And the Gemara continues, Meisveh, we have a question on Rav from the following brisa. Again, Rav says Mekadesh b'milva is not a good kiddushin. The brisa says, Omer li sheskachi li b'pikodin sheyesh li b'yodcha. If a man says to a woman be mekudeshes to me with the deposit that you have, meaning it's the deposit that belongs to me that you have, you no longer need to return it to me. V'halcho mitzvah shenignav v'shaved, and she goes and she finds that it was stolen or was lost. She doesn't even have it. Im nishtayir heimenu shavapruta, if there remains of it something that's worth a pruta, mekudeshes, it's a good kiddushin, because essentially he's giving her a pruta. V'im la veina mekudeshes, and if not, it's not a good kiddushin. Uvemilva, but when it comes to a loan, afal pisha lo nishtayir heimenu shavapruta, even if there's not remaining the value of a pruta, mekudeshes, that is a good kiddushin if he forgives the loan for a kiddushin. That seems to go against what Rav says. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishum Rabbi Meir, and the brisa continues. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says in the name of Rabbi Meir, milva when it comes to a loan, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis.